and really want to say welcome to everybody and just start us off with a prayer, and then we'll jump right into our conversation today. So let's pray. Most gracious and loving God, we give you thanks for the many blessings that show up in our lives in so many ways and on so many days. And today, this conversation will be a blessing, and we give thanks. It's an opportunity to learn from one of our colleagues in ministry and to imagine what can be for our ministries, our communities, our churches, and for the kingdom. So bless and keep us in our time together, that we would glorify you in all that we do. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. So for our webinar conversation today, this is one of our leadership development webinars, and this one is Imagine Exploring Cooperative Parishes. And of course, you know that because you signed up for it. And Lauren Anderson, Reverend Dr. Lauren Anderson, is going to be our guest and our conversation partner, and really she's going to do most of the talking. I am Kim Ingram. I'm the Director of Ministerial Services and the Conference Secretary for the Western North Carolina Conference. And Lauren is the pastor and in her 4th year as the Director of the Anchor Cooperative Parish, which is up in East Bend. Lauren, I should have looked on a map. I have an idea. I know you're in the Yadkin Valley District, but why don't you just start by telling everybody where East Bend is in case they're not familiar?
You come out of the district office in Winston and you turn right on 67. You just keep on going for 25 minutes and you end up in East Bend, sort of northwest of town.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren.
Yeah,
well, Lauren, welcome. We are excited to have this conversation with you today. I think that the people that are joining us are in different places in their curiosity about whether they're serving a cooperative parish, whether they're curious about serving a cooperative parish, and you've had some interesting and great experiences. You really jumped into something that in our conversations you didn't necessarily know what you were getting into, or even was it the thing that you had hoped for next in your ministry, and yet you've really embraced it. And so we look forward for you to telling us all about that. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll get started. I want to start by reading a text I know will be familiar to everybody from Acts chapter 2. When the day of Pentecost had come, they were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. Divided tongues as a fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Spirit gave them ability. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem. And at this sound, the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. In our own languages, we hear them speaking about God's deeds of power. All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "What does this mean?" What does this mean? I love that question, and I feel like it fits so well with where we are now and with the potential for cooperative parishes across our conference, because the reality is we are in a time where the church is changing. Some of that has been changes that those of us serving in local churches have been seeing for a number of years: declines in attendance, increases in average age, shrinking populations in some areas. And now to all of that, we've added this layer with disaffiliations. And in many cases, that also means disruptions or changes in the ways that some of our partner ministries have happened in our communities. And so I really feel like it's a time to be asking this, what does this mean question? And starting out in Acts, I think it's a reminder that sometimes that means we don't know all the answers. We don't know quite what it means, but just pray, asking that God would lead us and send the Holy Spirit to guide and direct our conversations, and for each of you all discerning what it might look like in your settings or something you may be called to in a different setting. And I feel like we are going to have to, as a church, be working together in different ways moving forward. Just the realities of what we've been through in recent years and some of our communities, even just in recent months. And so Cooperative Parish I see is one way that may happen. And I hope today will be helpful to you all. Like Kim said, I'll do a fair amount of the talking, but then we'll also have time for some questions in there. And I just think as pastors, we're probably all in places we didn't expect to be, like Kim said. And our call is to be willing and able to ask tough questions, and then to try to be faithful in answering those in faithful and also in sustainable sorts of ways. So that's kind of the overlay of what we'll be looking at today.
Thanks, Lauren. So kind of backing up a minute, you've been in ministry for how long, or under appointment? For 20 years. And the last 4 of those years you have spent at this cooperative parish. Why don't you give us some background? How did this appointment come to be? And when you took it, what were you expecting, or what were you thinking you were coming to, or what expectations have been placed upon you? And then tell us just a little bit about how you came to create the cooperative parish.
Yeah, so I will say that this is never where I thought that I would be. And I think that's probably the case for many of us. A little bit on my background. After I graduated from seminary, I went to England for a year and did the program where you go over and serve as a part of the British Methodist Church. And so I had that background. I'd spent a year, there were 8 churches on our circuit that worked together. And then I came back, and ministry was kind of what I thought it would be. Like, every church is a little bit bigger than the one before. I started as an associate, and then every single church was like a little bigger than the last one. And so like, okay, this is what ministry is supposed to look like. Got a doctorate in congregational growth and development along the way. And then I got appointed to East Bend. And like Kim, I was like, okay, let me get out a map. And I mean, I never really questioned God a lot at that point. I'd never had any sort of call feeling connected to rural ministry. I grew up outside of Washington, D.C. And that was really a time of soul searching for me. I mean, the people were great, but it was really, God, why did you do this? Bishop, why did you do this? And I think probably at some point or another, a lot of us have been there. And then, you fast forward to today, and ministry in 2023, I don't think is what any of us could have envisioned that we would be doing. The specifics of that may be different, but ministry is just not what we had anticipated. So like, that's kind of what I brought to East Bend. And so I knew that I was going to a population, an area that was really, really different from me. And so I did a lot of listening. A lot of really trying to pay attention to what was happening, to what was important to people. The census, the most recent census records say that in 2020, the population of East Bend proper is 739 people. And in that, there are 7 United Methodist churches and 17 churches altogether. And so I sat down with my 2 churches, and they didn't even have budgets. So we started doing budgets. The news was not good. And so I just started trying to listen. And I think one of the things I learned was to be a better listener in that space, because I didn't know what I could add. And there were a couple of things that started coming up really consistently as I listened. Everyone telling the story of a church in the community that was closed by the conference. So they all thought they were going to be next to be closed by the conference. And then a lot of fear around that, a lot of mistrust of kind of our system, district, conference, all of that. They just were not sure what to make of it. And like we've all experienced, a lot of folks saying, but we've always done it this way. It's like, this is how we're going to be. And there were also some really cool things that were happening there. And they had a group called East Bend United that was just coming together. And that's all 7 of those United Methodist churches, like basically functioning like a really healthy missional network. Technically, our missional network included some other churches, but this is the 7 who were in community together. And they were doing really powerful ministry that was lay-led. And so that was really good. That was certainly a base to start from. And then it was people who love the Lord. We may have had different ways of kind of showing that, but they were good and faithful people. But we were struggling financially. We were struggling with numbers. And it just wasn't sustainable. I mean, I could see that in the books as soon as we got budget stuff together. And so as I mentioned, I started ministry in England. And so I just had in my head this way where there were 8 churches in our circuit, and there were 2 pastors, myself, and then what you call it, the superintendent, so like my boss. So she was over the 8, and I was kind of the associate, basically. And they just worked together. Everybody did. You got anybody to preach who could preach. I mean, you had retired Anglicans, you had spouses of Anglican pastors, you had lay speakers, lay readers. I mean, that stand up and read a sermon of John Wesley's really did still happen at that point. So, and then when one of the churches had a function, everybody went. And it was everybody supporting each other while still maintaining their individual identities. And so to me, that was the way I had started ministry. I had done some crazy field eds during my time at Duke, so I didn't really have much experience in just like regular church. So regular church to me was what I saw in England. And then at the time, the DS in Yadkin Valley was Mike Bailey, and Mike had served in Scotland. And so he had that same experience of the way that churches could work together. And so that's kind of what we started to live into, is trying to figure out how that might come to be. One of the things that we had, and I would encourage y'all, kind of where we're at in the timing, is appointment year and stuff like that. It's we're kind of having the chance to start doing that visioning of like, what are things going to look like 2023 into 2024. What is our church going to look like beyond 2024? I'd been with the 2 churches for 3 years when we found out that it was Robin Fitzgerald at the time, now Robin Barge, was at 2 other churches right down the street. And one of my churches had actually been birthed out of one of hers, or split off from one of hers. And Robin was in a relationship and moving to Virginia. So like we knew early in the fall. So I just started asking these questions of, how might ministry look different? How might this be sustainable with the numbers, the finances? How might we best serve the community? How might we work together in ways that are fruitful for ministry? And so we had the chance to do that early. Her churches knew in September that she was leaving. So we don't always get that. We don't always get that in our structure, but we do have, a lot of y'all, I'm sure, have, some of you I know, have the missional network pieces that are functioning at some level, and kind of the way that the chance to move forward together. And so we just went into this period of listening and discerning what might be possible. And I will say too, sometimes cooperative parishes come out of sort of an anchor church model. If any of y'all have done any work with Beth Chrisman, that's what she talks a lot about, sort of having one big church and then it's sort of the support for however many smaller churches. We're more even, so it can go either way. And our model, I think, has been helpful because as these 4 churches started looking together, we had to say over and over, we are not trying to close you. We are not trying to close you. The goal is, because at first the mistrust was definitely there. So I think it helped us that there wasn't, one of the churches is a bit bigger, but it wasn't so much stronger that everyone feared kind of getting absorbed. So that was kind of part of how we got going.
So Lauren, just to be clear, originally the appointment was just a 2-point charge. And you were there for 3 years before this conversation kind of started to begin and think about what could be. And so as you knew that these other 2 churches were going to need an appointment, you started the conversation. Did you start the conversation with the churches first, or with Robin first, or with the DS first? Like, it sounds like it was kind of percolating in your mind, but what was the first step as you begin to think about what could be?
Robin and I started talking, and also the 2 of us went and met with the district superintendent. So he knew, of course, that she was leaving as well, but that gave us the chance to to have the conversation together, to talk about some of the practical things about, the gifts that different churches brought to it. But that helped in getting on the same page. I mean, we needed to make sure that the district superintendent would be supportive, because if we didn't have that, and this wasn't happening anywhere else, like the way that I was envisioning it. So we needed to start with Mike Bailey, and he was all over it.
So that was an easy sell.
Yeah, that was super helpful.
So the next step then would be to begin the conversation with the churches. And
Yes.
you did that before the appointment actually became official, I assume.
We did. We spent months on that part. And I think, for those of you who may be interested in this and looking at it in current settings, or if you move somewhere new in June and have the chance to start those conversations, it took a lot of different forms. So we had official conversations. Randy Blanchard was our district vitality specialist at the time. And so Randy came out and we had like official meetings in each church to talk about it. And we brought people into it from very different places. So one of the churches, we were already having a conversation about merger or closure. And that was the reality. And so then this kind of came onto the table for them as, oh, well, there might be this other thing. So we looked at that. And then it was talking one-on-one with the key leaders, making sure that the folks in each of the churches, that it's something that they would be open to. Those are the same folks who were already involved in East Bend United. They already knew each other. They already worked together in different ways. So all the key leaders were open to it. And then it was bringing some people in. I mean, one stodgy old guy was like, it's going to be cheaper. That's all he needed to hear. This is going to be cheaper. Well, then we need to do it. So it's like, I had to, play the audience, I guess. And so it was some people, it was getting them excited, helping them to see the visionary side, and they would jump in, like seeing the way that if we have more people, we could more effectively minister in our community. We could have more Bible studies, we could have more whatever. And then some needed the real practical, oh, this will be cheaper. Let's do it. So it was just communicating. I mean, it was talking. It was like just being stopped when I'm standing in Kohl's shopping for bathing suits and being stopped in the Walmart parking lot. It's like in the bathroom and this voice comes from the stall next to me. Well, I've been thinking. So just like wherever God opened doors, we tried to use them. And then one of the key things I'll say, and I think this is super, super important. I did some work with another conference and I highlighted this because most people, it's like, so are we losing our pastor? That's the question. They need to know that they're cared for. So we made it really clear who the pastor in charge would be at each church. And it's like, okay, some people, as soon as they knew, if I have an emergency, this is who I call, then they were in. So it's kind of recognizing people come at church from different places, honoring that, and trying to weave cooperative ministry into what their reality is, rather than trying to tell them they need a different reality. That doesn't generally work.
So as you're trying to create this cooperative parish, you're having this conversation with, I guess you're having it with the members of your two churches. Robin's having it with a member of her two churches, just trying to prepare the field for to make it right. Then you moved into the appointment. So then the district superintendent appointed you to the 4 churches and you called it a cooperative parish, right?
Yeah, and we had done a lot of work up to that point. We actually had votes in as church conferences in each of the 4 churches with our district CVS present, so that each church was voting as to whether or not they were choosing to come into this. Now, I'll be upfront, as a pastor, there was work behind that. Some of them knew they had the choice of this or closing. So, I mean, sometimes you sort of hit that, right? You have the choice of this, or Mike may not have anyone else to send as your pastor. But you've got excited people in every church too. So it was that whole balance and voting into the process. So we did, because it also meant totally changing the budget and the finances for each church. So that had to happen at a church conference anyway before the appointments kind of became finalized.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that and kind of what the nature of a cooperative parish is. But I wonder if you could just tell us kind of what was the most important success. If you said kind of this is the one thing that we really needed to do first that was most important, what would you say?
I think it was really listening to what people said and then trying to figure out what they actually meant by it. Because as we know as pastors, those are often two really different things, right? And so it was hearing the fears and like being able to recognize that we had to have pastoral care covered in a very clear way. They had to know that they were going to be taken care of, that if their spouse had a heart attack July the 1st, they would know what to do and someone would be there for them. And so it was hearing those kinds of concerns and helping them to feel that we were really listening, that I think that was critical in the beginning. You still had, you're still going to have some folks who are, we've always done it this way, but, and then giving them some hope. It really provided hope for people who felt like there was no future other than their church was just eventually going to die.
So that's important. And interestingly, not only probably in a cooperative parish, but almost any new thing that you want to do in a church or when you are new to a church, those are probably the most important characteristics. So one thing that I'm wondering if people are thinking, because it was something that I still think about, and even though you've answered this question for me, I still need help understanding it. So we have charges, and there are people who are appointed to charges, maybe 2 or 3 point charges. And we have missional networks where you already said there's an East Bend group that's not your missional network, but operates kind of like that. How is a cooperative parish different from both of those things?
Right. And Stacey was asking the exact same question as you asked that. She put that in the chat.
Great minds.
And I would say that there are a couple of levels of that. And there's also not one right answer. If you look in the Book of Discipline, there are different sort of levels of cooperative parishes. So it can be something that you step into a bit at a time. But for us, I would say that generally it means looking at the big picture first. It means asking the question of how can we most effectively serve our community and build the kingdom in this place while also honoring individual churches. And that we don't, we have leadership that's combined, we have shared staff. Let me go ahead and kind of share what that is. So I'm the director of the cooperative parish. I'm a full-time elder. And then we've got 2 part-time assistant pastors. One of them, Dustin, is half-time with us. And then the other one is quarter-time. That happens to be my husband. And he focuses more in finance and that kind of stuff. So the 3 pastors are preaching at all 4 churches and leading ministries that are joint. One of the things I think can make it really different from a charge is a lot of our charges end up being one bigger church and 1 or more smaller churches and percentages of time. I mean, because that's how we break out the finances, right? You say you have a 75-25 charge. And so then you've got your 75% charge that's thinking, well, and saying often, well, we deserve 75% of the time. Well, we put in 75% of the money. Well, we get 75% of you. And we don't do that. We look at the ministry and we look at the different building spaces and try to work at what is best, big picture for kingdom building. And then it just kind of, it just shakes out from there. Like one example, last summer, the lay leader and like key head of the main family at one of my churches had a heart attack and died suddenly. And that church puts in the smallest amount of money to the parish. But everyone at that point in time knew that that's where my focus needed to be. And so no one from any of the other 3 churches asked anything of me during that week, because that's where I needed to focus my time and energy, not just with that individual family, but with the whole church that was grieving in a really difficult way. And so I think that to me is one of the differences in sort of the charge piece. And then we share financial resources in a deeper level than a charge typically does. So we have everybody pays in, and they are different percentages. Ours are totally weird because and I don't recommend that. That's just how it had to start out. We're fixing some of that this year, but everybody pays in. So like some of y'all on charges may navigate, like if you go to the hospital, well, for the mileage that you've written off to the hospital, which church did you have a member who was there from, and who are you turning that into, or how does it work if you go someplace for a district meeting and that benefits both? Like, we don't have any of that. Everybody just pays money in monthly. We get reimbursed from kind of the one main pot. All 3 of us do. Our salaries are all paid out of the same place. We have one main office that we maintain. And so that church's internet bill is covered, the copier at that church. So like we share physical resources like the copier and office kinds of things, one phone system. So then we've got, some of y'all may have this too, like the local phone company has that call chain thing where we can send out automated calls. We just have one subscription and then it all runs through that, but we can send it to individual churches. So it's kind of, it's more woven together than a charge. And then it has some of the benefits of a mission, definitely has benefits of the missional network in terms of the way we look at ministry. And then we look practically kind of at each situation or ministry and say, well, which location would be the best for this? Or where do we see the gifts that are, needed to support that particular ministry? And then worship, I'll speak to that too. Casey's asking. So our worship again is kind of crazy. So all 3 of us preach in all 4 churches. The current setting is, we're shifting this a little bit, but we had one of the churches that was really struggling when we started out. They were just worshiping twice. We shifted them to just worshiping twice a month at their request. We're coming back out of that. And so basically what it's going to be is 2 9:30, 9:45 services and 2 11 o'clock services. And then within that, we're covering 4 worship services. And because one of the assistants is my husband, often, one of the 11 o'clocks that he's preaching and I'm not, Dustin's at the other church, then I'll preside for him or we'll do communion together, different stuff like that. But we kind of cross-pollinate in the preaching a little bit. We still have main preachers. So they kind of know, so the music people know who to reach out to with questions on plan and worship, but we have enough overlap like that I get to see what's happening at all the churches, get to touch base with people, hear pastoral concerns and that kind of stuff.
So Lauren, thinking about cooperative, like that's a great descriptor for things. And we don't have as much cooperation in our kind of day and time sometimes as we'd like to have. So it sounds like you do have some distinct like worship, like every church has their own worship. What are the things that you really do cooperatively that feels like it's just a collective experience for all churches at once, where they really are more like one church instead of 4 churches?
Yes. So the biggest example of that I would say is our youth group. And so we have one parish youth group. And that was one of the pieces, and probably some of y'all are in similar settings. That was one of the easiest things to get going. New Home and Shady Grove had already had a joint youth group. And so it became something for all 4 churches. And every church understood they didn't have enough kids and they didn't have enough help to do it themselves. But everybody wanted it. So I'll never forget Mike Bailey saying early on, he said, low-hanging fruit. You got to go for the low-hanging fruit. You got to win something early on that people can understand. And I think he was right. And so for us, that first thing was the youth. And Dustin came on particularly to do youth. And so that's his area. Everybody knows if it's youth, you reach out to Dustin. He leads it every week. It's at the same church. It's at the one church that has a separate family life center. So the location of it was chosen based on the practical needs of the youth and what space would be best for what they were doing, and where more of our leadership was coming from. But the youth is one. We come together on fifth Sundays, and I know a lot of churches have a tradition of doing something around fifth Sunday, and that's been super fun because we just said in the beginning, we said, this is each church's chance to feel full and to remember how worship used to be. They're all grieving the 1960s when there were, the pews were packed out and all that mess. And so rather than saying like, oh, on fifth Sundays, you don't get to have worship. It's no, this Sunday, we're all going to Shady Grove and we're going to support Shady Grove getting to have that feel good feeling.
And so there are 4 fifth Sundays a year, right? So every church gets one of those. Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm. And then they have input into what they want it to be. So sometimes one of us will preach. Sometimes they like to bring in music groups. So sometimes it'll be bringing in an outside music group so they can help that individual church can decide what they want it to look like. And so that's joint. And then we have some of the stuff is sort of all East Bend United. So that's kind of both levels. It would be sort of like having this and having the missional network. All of our seasonal worship stuff is together. Ash Wednesday, none of these churches could have enough folks to support having an Ash Wednesday service on their own. But I mean, together we had like 40 people. So, and then we also had a joint choir for Ash Wednesday. We had hoped to be able to do more specific joint music stuff, but COVID hit, and then 3 of the churches have not gotten their choirs there. So that's something else that we've come together for, is a lot of the seasonal worship stuff. And then we have a joint leadership team, which has just been, it has completely redeemed my understanding of what a staff parish committee can be when it's done well, when you have the right people on, and they're so, they are church for each other too. So that's really shaped the way that things happen, is the way that they work together. I'm trying to think what else. Are there other things I've mentioned to you that I'm missing?
Well, so talk to us for a minute. We'll come back to that, but it can't always be rosy. And so there probably been some challenges along the way. What have some of those been?
Well, I think we've in the beginning, it was overcoming that fear that this really was trying to close us, and the mistrust of the district and the conference. So we've tried really hard and done everything we can to communicate kind of past all of that. One of the things that has come up post-COVID that has been so frustrating, but I think it's probably happening in a lot of places, is now there are folks that are saying, well, if we only had our own pastor. And anybody who has served on a charge knows that it's like the goal of churches on a charge is to not be on a charge. Like everybody wants to be big enough to be self-sustaining and to be able to afford their own pastor and do their own thing. And so to shift the mentality to, wait a minute, like maybe we can do better and more effective together. We're getting some pushback now that's like, well, if we only had our own pastor, more people would be coming.
That are fairly unreasonable.
Look around, like they're out in the cemetery.
But it does sound like you're always having to sell it. Like it wasn't just something that you helped people understand the benefit of it so that you could do it, but you're always having to remind people of what they are gaining from it, what difference it makes, how it benefits the kingdom, the community, and the churches.
It's, some people, but it's the same people who, the leaders will tell me that they've had to sell the current pastor to those same people every single time, right? Like that nothing is ever the right thing or the right person. So
you do have people that continue to be supportive and encouraging and excited about it.
yes. And another piece that I'll say that we've done, and this has brought some people, this has helped shift some mindsets as well, is one of the things that we always do together now is Bible studies. And that is something that all the churches had Sunday school when we were coming in, but they did not have small group Bible studies so much. One of the churches did occasionally, but the others did not, because they didn't have enough people. And so that has been a powerful piece to be able to add. And a couple of the naysayers have gotten pretty involved in the Bible studies and really appreciated that and heard a different side of things. And so that's been a helpful piece. But yeah, there is this part that's, I think as pastors, if we're going to ever do anything that's not what they did in the past, then we're constantly going to be trying to sell it. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I couldn't get it to unmute. So when you have kind of new people, whether they're new to the churches or just new people you're trying to raise up in leadership, how do you identify where you have the best fit for them? Or as you reach out into the community, how do you decide how you draw people in when you're pastoring 4 churches that are kind of in the same community?
Well, it's been interesting because the folks that we have been drawing in have, at this point, a lot of them have come from the same, well, I'll just give you an example. I had somebody who reached out to me via our website, which is not up to date if you look, but at the time it was better up to date, and reached out and he said, I see that you're the pastor at 4 churches, and my husband and I are wondering if there might be one of those churches that would be open to us coming as a same-sex couple. And only one of the 4 churches was even potentially a place that I thought might be safe and healthy for them. And even that, there was a little bit of a risk. And I articulated that to him. I said, come on, I think that they will welcome you in. And they have, and it has been incredible. And that church has become much more inclusive in the time that I've been there, and it's just grown organically. That then we've got a member who owns a coffee shop. Well, then when 2 women came in together, we're new to town, we're asking about a church, he's able to say, oh, well, I know this church where I think they'd like you. And so like that's been one specific one. Sometimes it's through the children's ministry, and that can be a little bit different because a lot of the leaders are from Shady Grove and it takes place at Prospect. So then, but it's never been like a competition. It's just sort of where people fit best. And even in East Bend, and those of you who are in rural areas can relate, just because it's one community, you're still divided out by a road. And I mean, if you're on Shady Grove Church Road, it's a quarter of a mile from Smithtown Road. Well, it intersects Smithtown Road, but those are totally different communities. so that can still sort of play in, but we have a broader base to be able to offer people that they can fit into, and that's been helpful.
So I served as an associate of a small town, medium size, I don't know what you call it, but anyway, in Shelby, I'll just say that, in Shelby. My husband was the associate of the other town church in Shelby. That's where we started ministry. And there was, and part of this is on me because I am competitive by nature, but somebody would visit one church or somebody from one church would come to the other church. Anyway, like there is a real thing in communities where churches can be competitive. Now we all know, and this was more of me, I'll just know that, but we all know there are plenty of people to come to church that aren't just moving from church to church, that are just, unchurched people and available. But it seems like like the possibility of a charge or cooperative parishes, there would be some competition. And you just addressed that, which is what made me think of it. Like, have you had to intentionally diminish a sense of competition, or has it not shown up? Or how has that worked?
It hasn't shown up. And I recognize that it could. Like, I think your question is very valid, and we've been blessed not to have to deal with it. Some of it is a bit of our geography. Like, one of the 4 churches, the address is Boonville. And yeah, you can be there in 10 minutes, but they go the other direction to shop. Like, they're kind of a different community. So they would draw from different people, but they're happy to drive into where the other churches are and do things together. And some of it, the questions I've gotten recently, so the only church that's growing in members is the one that has chosen a more progressive stance. And so I have, in the last couple of months, had a couple of people from the other churches asking me about that. Sort of like, so they've welcomed such and so, or whoever, and they've joined. Yes. So I think it's caused them to do sort of some internal searching, like, okay, what do we want to be about? But they've not seen it as competition so far.
Well, curiosity is a good thing. So makes people wonder a little bit. So the last question I have for you, and then we'll open it up. So I want to kind of get people prepared for that opportunity, is I know you all have a really strong East Bend group of United Methodist churches. You do a summer literacy program that's part of the Duke Endowment. How do these 4 churches then fit into kind of the broader mission work? And you haven't talked much about mission work as it relates to either the cooperative parish, but is that mostly your missional network where all of you feed into, or how does that work?
Most of our bigger stuff is, we have some things that are a little bit more in-house. Prospect had a tradition before I came in of doing a Super Bowl soup lunch for the Yakin Christian Ministries, our local food pantry. And so those sorts of things, Prospect still does it, but all the churches are invited, and all the churches are invited to take up offerings in their own churches, even if they don't come. And it's all put together kind of under Prospect, but like everybody is, giving money to the one food bank in town. So, and then same with like a walk for Yakin Christian Ministries. We might have one church that coordinates it, but then the other churches are invited to be a part of it because it's a community thing anyway. Mount Pleasant is a little different. Mount Pleasant is the one out in Boonville, and they have a little free pantry. So like during COVID, we did food drives to support Mount Pleasant's little free pantry. And everybody was happy to do that. It was like, this is Mount Pleasant's thing, and we want to be able to help support them. We want them to succeed. We want to reach the people in the community that need it. So we don't really care like which church the little pantry thing sits at. We just want the food to get out, and we'll help that to happen. And then for the bigger stuff, like you said, it's through East Bend United, which is the 7 churches. And so the literacy grant is through them. And other stuff that we do in the schools and stuff like that is the 7 churches working together. They have always been lay-led by structure and had one pastor who's the pastor liaison. And so after we formed the parish, I became that pastor. It made the most sense. So then anything that's happening at East Bend United, and it's one of our folks who's the chair of that committee as well, anything that's happening with them, I'm real clear to go back and get the communications out to our churches. We'll have like an insert for the bulletin of all upcoming East Bend United stuff. And then the same stuff is going out to all 4 churches, and we're getting them kind of plugged in, next level up.
So have those other 3 churches in the community kind of embraced this model? The other 3 United Methodist churches that are not on your cooperative parish, but in the mission network.
And it's, it's been interesting. We were starting to have, and this, within the last couple of months, one of my key leaders said to me, yeah, I was talking to such and so, one of the other 7 churches. And he said, I've told them they need to come join the parish. they're struggling, and I've told them that the parish would be good for them, and we work together on stuff. I thought that's the best testimony you can have.
Absolutely.
When somebody shares the struggles in their church, it's like, no, you wouldn't be struggling if you work with us.
So who knows what you've created and what it'll become. So I'm going to take you and me off spotlight and make it back to a full gallery. Okay, so there we go. And it's a small enough group. I know a lot of people have their cameras off, so they may just be listening, but we still have a few more minutes just to kind of open the conversation up. What are you wondering? What questions do you have? What would you like to either talk with one another about or ask Lauren? You can put it in the chat, but you're welcome to just unmute and ask the question.
This is Laura. One of the things that I would be interested in, the fact that this opportunity was offered for us to learn more about this model. And I know, Lauren, you have been participating in other situations with panels and things like that. I mean, is this something that is seen as a future possibility for a number of different scenarios going forward? Is it something that's like the conference is really encouraging in situations where there are, a number of churches in a community that are struggling? I mean, is this something that if someone is interested in it, is it going to be like the way you did it, which is where you kind of started it from scratch? Or is it possible that there may be opportunities that are going to be there that the bishop or district superintendents are, proposing that this be what happens, and they would be looking for clergy to fill those situations potentially?
Kim, you want to answer that? Or Dan, I see that you're on. Are you all in a better?
I wondered if Dan would be willing to kind of just talk from his perspective about how he would answer that question.
Yes, and our fire alarm's off now, so I can actually talk.
Great.
You must be at home, Kim. It's been going off for like the last several minutes.
Well, I'm glad I'm not there then.
So the answer to your question is yes to all of that. So as district superintendent, I'm currently actively looking at places in the district that would be good candidates for cooperative parishes that would strengthen churches and congregations. Also, earlier, Lauren, you talked about the distrust that the conference has this reputation for going around and closing churches, which I'm not sure where that exactly comes from, because that's not the conference that I've known. But that reputation is out there. And so for us to go in and recommend cooperative parishes can sometimes be just received in that same light. So we're also looking for places where it bubbles up, where churches ask, and the way that they ask this tends to be, we're all doing kind of the same things. Wouldn't it be better if we were just to share some of our resources? Or, one church called and said, what if we had the same person do our lawns? And that to me is, oh, you're inviting me into a conversation about a cooperative parish, of being able to share resources and gifts and everything between different churches. So we're looking for places where that bubbles up. We're looking for intentional places where we might plant seeds for that to grow. We don't want to force churches into cooperative parishes against their will. That's not something that we practice. We want to do this in places where it would be helpful and where it would be well received. So that could create intentional appointments around cooperative parishes in the future, and perhaps even you would see some of that this year.
And I know Beth Chrisman is a huge advocate for cooperative parishes and has done work in that area in the past. So with her coming back on the cabinet, I would, she and I talked a little bit. I know that there's a definite cooperative parish advocate at the table.
So I wonder whether anybody on the call has their own experiences they want to share something from. There may be something that you have done that's similar, or that you're an experiment you're trying. Is there anybody that is on the call that would want to share something you're doing? Everybody just came to learn.
Well, I'm currently in extension ministry, but when I was appointed to a church at one point as the deacon associate, there were 3 churches in the community that did the youth group together, which was exactly why Lauren described that was one of the easiest low-hanging fruit in Mike Bailey's term to do something with, because churches often do not have very many youth. And so when they combine together, you're able to do things at scale more in terms of the activities and, going on field trips and other types of things like that. And I remember that being really good. There were certainly people who did not like it, that was the way we were doing it. And it was just very informal. But it reminded me of that, Lauren, when you gave that example of it's definitely something that could often, I think, be the pilot aspect of moving in the direction of a cooperative parish because of the situation in a lot of churches around that.
I think one of the things too that can be a real stimulus getting started is the way that the pastors in the area work together. So if you find yourself in a place where, there are a group of you that work well together, one of the things that we loved is that each of us are pastoring in our areas of most giftedness. I mean, I'm a detail organizer person, and that's what I do. My husband is a CPA. He's in charge of the budgets, the finance, and I don't have to do it. It's him. And Dustin is youth and music. And everybody understands those things and they know who to go to. But it also means for us, it's getting to really live into those things that we're the most passionate about, which makes us all feel more fulfilled. When often, especially rural ministry can end up being like you're just trying to wear all the hats, and half of them you feel like you're not very good at. Thanks, Stacey. But that this has given us the chance to, partner together with other people. And if somebody else is better than you at something, well, then let them be the one who's doing it, because that benefits everyone. But you've got to have people who want to work together, right? Like that's both ways. This does not work when you've got your lone ranger pastor. And I can't tell them that they're going to be in a cooperative parish because they're not going to cooperate.
Right. That's what I thought about. It's like, you've got to be willing to cooperate. Like that's just kind of the foundation of everything you've been talking about, is the ability and the willingness and the desire to really cooperate, to do something collectively. I mean, we talk about this a lot, but we're better together. So how do you help people continue to see and understand that together they can make so much more of a difference? And yeah, it's so exciting. What other questions are there? We just have a few more minutes.
How about the structure of the church council or administration? How is that handled jointly?
Thank you. I meant to touch on that. So we have one parish, what we call parish leadership team, and there are 3 people from each of the 4 churches who sit on that, and that came together sort of naturally for us. We weren't. It was basically the lay leader and 2 staff parish representatives from each of the original churches, and at that one committee does our budgets, our staffing stuff, they set salaries. We do the main visioning for outreach stuff. We coordinate each of the churches' different calendars. If somebody's having homecoming one Sunday, that's who makes sure that, nobody else is going to do something the same day or whatever. And that group has been absolutely phenomenal to work with. And they have they're the core of my Bible study group. And it also they feed off each other in a really positive way, because they're the ones used to being the one in their church that everybody complains to, the one in their church who always has to fill in when nobody else will do it, the one in their church that wears 5 different hats. And now they're together, and there's real relief for them in that. And even when they're sharing something church specific, the way that this group supports each other, they'll share confidentially about something that's happening at their church. And the other churches, there's no competition. It is absolutely pastoral in the support that they give each other, suggestions for things, encouragement. They know all the people. I mean, they went to grade school together. So it is the same community in that sense. But that group has been so much fun to work with. And it hasn't added kind of like a whole nother set of meetings. If you're thinking, oh, I gotta do that on top of everything else, it's taken the place of some of this stuff. And if any church has the need for their staff parish to meet separately, then those 3 people do break off and function as that individual church to staff parish committee.
So each church is represented equally on this leadership
they're all
team.
equal. And so if there's a vote, everybody knows it's not about the money you've put into the pot. You've got an equal place at the table.
And then each church has their own, some structures, like does every church have their own trustees, for example?
Yeah, so they do all that on their own, but the parish leadership also, Dan, you said the thing about mowing, parish leadership will be where someone might come and say, our pest guy quit. Who does everybody else use for pest control? It is that place to get, did your smoke detectors fail inspection or, whatever. So they do some of that, but the churches have, a couple of the churches are on single board model, which is super helpful for that, but they've got their separate structures too.
So it looks like we have time for one more question. Is there one other thing that anybody is wondering or wants to offer? And I'll just kind of ask one more thing, and this is going to be toward Dan. So Dan, you serve as a DS in a metropolitan area. Lauren is doing this in a more rural area. It seems like something that would be more common in a rural area, but I'm curious about how it could present itself in more of a metropolitan area, especially where it's not, as Lauren said, the model where there's one big church and, several other smaller churches on the cooperative parish. Do you have any idea about that? Yeah, you have to unmute first.
Thank you for that. We don't have a cooperative parish inside the loop, but we are looking at one. This would be a group of like-minded churches that have similar DNA, similar ministry areas and context, and they could really lean on each other. These are churches that have once been at one place in attendance and have been in decline and have come to a different place where they realize that they need more support. And that's one way to get there. In the metropolitan area, starting out with the cooperative parish is one thing. Moving that could branch into several other things. So as partnerships develop, they can really start to ask the question, how do we leverage our property well? And we're already starting to see in the metro district where churches come together in these kind of conversations and they decide, okay, we're going to sell one or both pieces of property in order to build or refurbish another property to create something that will take us into the future, something that might not be what our current buildings have been designed for. So it's really creating a lot of options and opportunity that one church alone would not have.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's just exciting what the opportunities, what the possibilities are, kind of when we think differently and help others to think differently. I really want to say thank you to Lauren. So she's going to host just a more casual conversation a week from today at noon, and I will send everybody the link to that. Just as a way to more informally continue to process, think about, kind of what's on your mind. I know a couple of you are having a conversation later today even about what it could look like. So out of that conversation, you may have some questions for Lauren. So you're invited a week from now to follow up this conversation in a more informal way with Lauren at noon, and I'll send you that information. Lauren, thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Absolutely. And thank you all. It can look different in different places, but we're going to have to work together moving forward.
And just a reminder, a little promo, the Western North Carolina Conference Leadership Development Team is here to support you in your ministry. And so as you identify things that would be supportive and helpful and needs that you might have, please let us know.
And a lot of that grant stuff is available when you say you're partnering with other churches too.
Thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks, everybody.